Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and this episode we'll have, predictions for episode 7 of The Acolyte. I've been waiting for this episode of The Acolyte ever since I took a look at the director's list for the show a few weeks back and saw the name Kogonado. So the way they've split directing duties in The Acolyte is pretty simple. Leslie Headland, the showrunner, directed the first 2 episodes of The Acolyte, which involved the murder mystery of both Master Indara and Master Torben. Alex Garcia Lopez, who has dozens of superhero and action-oriented TV episodes beneath his belt, handled episode 4 and 5, the epic fight on Kofar. And Hanel Culpepper directed episode 6 and episode 8, the final episode, which will neatly wrap up everything. Now, Kogonado is an indie filmmaker, and he doesn't come from the TV directing background, and that's why he kind of stands out from this crowd a lot. He's also the individual who was responsible for the extremely divisive 3rd episode of The Acolyte and is slated to direct episode 7. I'm almost certain that episode 7, tonight's episode, will be a flashback episode very similar to episode 3. We will return back to the past when Master Soul and the other Jedi visited the Witch Coven on Brendok. Episode 6 basically sets this entire thing up. There's a small possibility that maybe episode 8, the final episode, is the flashback, but I don't think so because of who the directors are. But anyway, the main reason I've been waiting for this episode for so long is because it'll most likely show us the other point of view of the Brendok incident. The Acolyte features an unreliable narrator, and I think the way the show was designed makes it very confusing to follow for the majority of audiences, especially when there's a week break in between each episode. I think this is a huge problem with this show. I usually don't have a problem with this, but when you're doing an unreliable narrator in a murder mystery, you kind of need to be constantly aware of previous scenes and character motivations, and that can be really hard when literally the show is stretched out over the course of 2 months and there's a week break in between each episode. I mean, even for me, it's really hard to keep focus and remember what's going on. I have to keep diving back and, look at older episodes. My memory is really bad. But, unlike most people, I actually have the time to, go back and do this. Most people just watch these shows one time, which I understand. But I think this is also why my reviews on The Acolyte are a bit different from other content creators, especially for episode 3. If you're just watching episode 3 without context for the wider series, I totally understand why people are confused and think the writing and the character motivations don't make sense or are bad. Now, don't get me wrong, there are bad spots in The Acolyte. I really didn't like episode 4. I felt like a lot of the dialogue, while not unnecessary, it just wasn't well executed or directed. What they were trying to do in episode 4 was build up the tension that would happen in episode 5, and it just fell flat for me. I feel like they had the wrong person. They had the action guy trying to direct all the more intimate scenes, and clearly, while he was good at action, the intimate scenes he was not good at. I feel like one day, if people actually sit down and watch this show from beginning to end, which I know is a big ask, but if people actually do that, I think the show will be a completely different experience. I think the pacing will still make it slightly too long. They probably can cut an hour from this TV series. But yeah, things will make a lot more sense. Now, I have to give credit to Leslie Headland for trying this unreliable narrator, Rashomon effect kind of thing. This is a relatively hard narrative vehicle to pull off in the first place, especially for Star Wars audiences. I mean, let's be honest, we're not used to this kind of stuff. We're used to very straight, direct narratives, not a lot of mystery, a lot of explosions, a lot of exposition. I mean, yeah, Andor does a lot of show don't tell, but even that is, a pretty straightforward narrative. But anyway, I understand that a lot of people hate episode 3 of The Acolyte. And not just the culture warriors. I see a lot of fans of this show, and also just Star Wars in general, bringing up a lot of understandable criticisms for the episode. This is probably also why our review of episode 3 of The Acolyte was probably one of the most divisive videos I've ever made on this channel. I said I liked it, and we got a lot of unsubs, which is disheartening, but I'm over it. It's okay. Now, admittedly, a lot of my enjoyment of episode 3 comes probably from my personal tastes and preferences. But I also have some pretty objective reasons why I think episode 3 is the strongest episode in the show so far. I like action in episode 5, but that's kind of like a cheat code. And before you guys start typing, blah, 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 you're wrong, you're a shill, and you're coping, hear me out first. Hear me out, okay? First, the director of episode 3, Kogonado, is a true auteur and a lover of cinema. What makes him unique is he actually started out his career as a video essayist. Kind of like what a lot of YouTubers do when they're talking about movies, but this guy is just, he's at a different level. He's He's really good. His essays are almost a work of art themselves, and more importantly, very creative, concise, and effective educational pieces. For instance, his essay titled, What is Neorealism for Sight and Sound features a side-by-side breakdown of two versions of Bicycle Thieves. On the left side of the screen, we have the original version directed by Vittorio De Sica, and on the right side, Kogonado makes his own edit of the movie, where he envisions how Bicycle Thieves might have turned out if Hollywood producers had forced De Sica to follow more standard American film cutting techniques. This is like a really smart gimmick that allows us, the viewers, to quickly understand the spirit of neorealism by seeing what traditional Hollywood-style editing subtracts from it. Italian neorealism blossomed post-World War II and focused much more on the plight of the everyman and woman suffering in the economic turmoil and moral crisis caused by the Mussolini regime. In films like Bicycle Thieves, many of the scenes are shot on location, with normal people who weren't actors predominantly featured in the background in longer shots that are, characteristic of the style and era of Italian film.
He lingers on extras that we'll never get to know. For De Sica, these extras are fellow inhabitants, not extra, but vital, and therefore worthy of some time.
Aside from his monotone voice, Kogonado is an extremely proficient and talented, storyteller and teacher. This entire video essay is only like 5 minutes. It's done in plain and easy to understand English. It would probably take your average film theory professor maybe like an entire lesson or maybe an entire semester to cover this. What Kogonado does so good is he focuses on the most important aspects and, almost in a poetic way, explains things, which you don't normally see in education at all. It was only natural for Kogonado to eventually make a leap from video essays where he's talking about other movies to actually making his own movies. His first film, Columbus, was layered both visually, narratively, and thematically in such a well thought out way. This is a movie that features a woman studying architecture that takes place in the city of Columbus, Ohio, known for its diverse and bold collection of beautifully designed buildings, which are featured predominantly as backdrops that help to set the tone and feel of the scenes on screen, thanks to the carefully framed and organized cinematography that really showcases the architecture. To put things simply, Kogonado is a film nerd who has artistic and disciplinary skills to just make amazing films that pay homage to the things he loves, but are also nuanced and different enough to stand out on his own. And at the same time, here's the most important aspect of Kogonado. A lot of these brilliant thinkers who can really make high-level cinema, they usually are a bit too abstract. They're usually a little bit too complex for more normal average cinema viewers to understand. This is my problem with a lot of indie films, experimental stuff. It's just too nuanced, it's too convoluted, but that's not Kogonado. His stuff is really simple, it's easy to enjoy, I'm a pretty simple person when it comes to what movies I like, and I like his content a lot. Kogonado does not seek to be contrarian and anti-conventional for the sake of being contrarian and anti-conventional. This is just the way he is. I liken his work to comfort food and high-level cinematic excellence all rolled up into one. His second film after Yang, a story about a family trying to save an AI boy before his memory core stops working, is another work of poetry, and it's a lot of visually driven storytelling. The story itself, it's okay. It's a little more cliche and average, in my opinion. But yeah, visually, that movie, it's just very pretty to look at, right? And so, going into episode 3 of The Acolyte, I had no idea Kogonado was actually related to this series. I admit, even though it's kind of my job, I usually don't read up too much on Star Wars projects, especially ones like The Acolyte where I'm not that excited about in the first place. I'll read up about Andor second season when it comes out for sure, but I was never a High Republic fan. I'm actually pleasantly surprised by The Acolyte because I feel like they did a good job with it. I wasn't expecting much, to be honest. Anyway, so when I started watching episode 3, this is when I really started enjoying The Acolyte more, because just the cinematic beauty and atmosphere of the opening shots really stood out for me. I felt like I was watching something that had a completely different tone from the more standard feelings first 2 episodes from Headland. Granted, this was still a Disney Plus show, and Kogonado had to work within the frame of Leslie Headland's writing, and also the work of 100 other creators. We always talk about how collaborative projects like Disney and Star Wars and Marvel films usually suffer because there are just way too many hands pulling things in every other direction. You sometimes really need an artistic vision to stand out, to guide everything, and you can't do that when you're just a director going into a show that you haven't created. But still, just watching the visuals in this episode, I could tell that things were slightly elevated. First of all, I really enjoyed the depiction of young May and Osha. I think it was a mistake for them to hire Amanda Stenberg for the role of Osha. I think I said this before. She's really a personality actress, kind of like Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford was a personality actor, a charisma-driven guy. He said lines like he owned them. He's going around saving people's lives, crashing planes and surviving. Harrison Ford is Han Solo. That's why we buy the role. But Amanda Stenberg is kind of young and bubbly. And for a person to play a set of identical twins, you almost need like a character actor. I think of Tom Hardy in Legend. The guy is just brilliant in that film. The way he transforms into his more psychotic brother, it's not just the fact that he wears glasses, it's the way he talks, the way he carries himself, the way his face kind of rests. But of course, Tom Hardy is much older. He's got a lot more experience, and he's kind of a crazy person, so that's why he plays that role really well. I think Amanda Stenberg, I don't think she's like the worst actress in the world, okay? I don't think she's horrible, but I have no idea why Hedlund casted her in this role, because a lot of things in the show kind of revolve around this relationship, and to me, it doesn't work. Like, half of the time, I forget who is May and who is Osha. It's just confusing for me. But yeah, I really liked young Osha and May. They felt much more distinct from one another. There was a clear difference in their motivation and personality. And unfortunately, because of the situations they were involved in, because of the larger galactic forces at play, those differences in motivation and personality really ripped these two girls apart in ways they probably never would have expected. I feel like Osha was also in the midst of her own leaving the moisture farm moment in life. George Lucas always talks about the modern mythology. We did a lot about that in the last episode. And he actually saw Star Wars as kind of a guide for kids when they first leave the comforts of home and venture out into the larger world. And I admit, as like a father to a little girl, which has really softened me up a lot, I couldn't help but relate and enjoy the themes about parenting. Yes, Mother Zabrak and Anasea are lesbians, but like most parents, they face the same issues, the same dilemmas that all people have to face when co-parenting. Because when you're young and you're in love, when you're experiencing the world together, you still have some level of autonomy, as a couple without children. But to share responsibility over another person that you created, that you care about more than anything in your life, that's where a lot of differences in personality and worldviews can come to play. And it's something that the witches have to work on, especially because the Jedi Order is coming for the children. And for some reason in Star Wars, we never see this part of the hero's life. We never see them interacting with their parents. We just see them become orphans for some reason. Everyone in Star Wars is a freaking orphan. Anyway, I remember reading this review from Forbes, which was like, this is the worst Star Wars episode ever made. And the guy here even highlights these lines that May and Osha say in a pivotal scene and kind of frame it as atrocious writing.
I will stop them. No one's taking me. The Jedi are bad.
The Jedi are good.
This isn't about good or bad. This is about power.
Like, first of all, this is how children talk, especially when they argue with one another. They don't use, like, complicated or operatic kind of one-liners, right? This is just natural argument for two kids. More importantly, there's no critique here about the central conflict in this scene that this dialogue leads to. The Jedi are enforcing their will and control of the Force over a radical coven of witches who are practicing some weird exotic type of magic. The dynamics of power is clearly the main focus and theme of this entire show. And I rarely hear any critics talk about whether this is done well or done poorly. When people used to critique movies, they would discuss thematic tones a lot and how they were executed in the narrative and the characters. And I think Acolyte does a reasonably good job at doing this. The best Star Wars films, like Empire, had strong thematic tones. In that movie, it was about friendship, loyalty, and love. Then you have people who are complaining about the witches and everything and how weird this episode felt. But guys, this is the same type of campiness you get in the Clone Wars. I can totally see Episode 3 being a side arc in the Clone Wars in animation. Of course, this Forbes author also meekly reminds us that the covens of witches are all women. That's not implied in the word witches. When I was a young cameraman doing the local news beat in New York City, I already saw the rise of these young, hungry online journalists. And this was just a sign of the times, a lot of traditional media just didn't have the money to do things the way they used to. So they were trying to compete with a lot of online outlets. And so you would have these kids who would write 5 or 6 online articles, usually about all sorts of random things that they have no experience about. Like, these aren't beat writers, these aren't people with lived experience. They're just Googling shit on the internet and then just copying and pasting sometimes. Like, back then I already saw where the media industry was going, but like, at least there were like editors to kind of keep some level of consistency and quality in the work. And since when did like Forbes start doing movie and culture reviews? Like, what the heck is going on? So back to episode 3, a lot of people were focused on the lesbian witches doing the cringy cries into the sky. Kind of reminds me of the female version of an alpha male retreat. Like, I want to tell 18-year-old me that people in the future will actually pay money, tens of thousands of dollars, to go through 2-a-days, an experience that no one enjoyed in their life. You know, militant feminists, whatever the fuck this is, we need each other, okay? Let's stop all of this nonsense. Let's try to get along. But yeah, while everyone was focused on the lesbian space witches, I think we missed out on some of the best cinematography and lighting in the series. Like this scene where May and Osha are intensely backlit by a setting sun in their room on a humid day. It's just beautiful. It's very Kogonado-esque. If you've seen After Yang. In another life, I also worked as a director of photography. I wasn't that good, but one of the things I enjoyed the most was like recreating sources of light in a scene to create like emotions and just dynamic feelings for you while you're looking at these scenes. And I think this is something that Star Wars does well in a certain way. Like, visually, Star Wars is kind of more focused on epic CGI and massive battles, and some of these things are lit in very glorious and amazing ways. From a visual standpoint, Star Wars has always been very strong. I mean, Lucas basically invented the space opera genre. And in recent times, you have like Favreau really leaning into the space western thing, which looks awesome as well. And then Tony Gilroy kind of brought out this really cold and austere look to Star Wars. But what's rare in Star Wars is the kind of warmth and intimacy we see in this episode in a few small moments. I mean, this is something you're more likely to see in like dramas or indie films, and I understand it's not normal to see these kind of things in Star Wars, but again, I feel like the Star Wars is almost like large enough to incorporate all sorts of genre. Like, there's room for cinematic excellence, always. Now, the witch ceremony, which was pretty cringy, like the lines were just, they weren't good. They're kind of classic prequel-era Star Wars lines from Lucas himself. But there are really some awesome shots here, too. Especially the one where you have the 2 kids in the golden outfits walk towards the camera with all the crazy witches around them, kind of possessed and undulating. Also, every scene with Mother Anastasia, aka Jodie Turner-Smith, just oozes charisma and regality. Her warmth on screen as a mother really matches the paternal warmth of Master Soul. And the way she carries herself, she's basically royalty. I mean, she belongs with the rest of the matriarchs, queens of Star Wars like Leia, Padme, Satine, and Kylo Ren. I love her accent too, but that just might be because I'm American. Like, you Brits have been like tricking us into buying stupid products with that high-fluting accent for way too long. It's exploitative. We should sanction you guys. But yeah, this episode felt really ethereal and artistic. You could also tell that this episode was written by women, because in the central conflict, the 2 main parties come together and discuss and de-escalate the situation instead of having an all-out brawl. I mean, there's no Mandalorian in full armor with a Gatling gun. You know, I really like that stuff as well, but I like this too. That's also literally the message and story behind this scene. You know, the Jedi and the Witches are both small pawns in this larger power struggle. And while these individual Jedi and Witches are all good in their own ways, it's the fear and lack of communication between these 2 parties that threatens to escalate the situation. Now, one of the biggest criticisms levied by a lot of fans is that the story, the motivations are confusing, and a lot of people point towards May starting the fire with that little gas lamp, and how rocks can't catch fire and stuff like that. Well, we made a lot of videos about this, but basically, again, Leslie Headland stated in interviews before the show even started that she wanted to incorporate what's known as the Rashomon effect, the unreliable narrator. And so what we see on the screen in episode 3 is not necessarily the truth. It's only really the point of view of one character, Osha. And I kind of missed this in my first watch through, but after I did the review and I sat back and watched it again, it became very clear there were like gaps in time and space that I believe will be filled by episode 7. I know a lot of people will say, oh, you're coping or you're chilling, but like it's frustrating when I hear that, because literally the creator of the show already teased that the unreliable narrator will be a thing in the show before it even launched. So this is something that's planned, it's baked in, and I think what a lot of people are confused about when it comes to character motives and like things not making sense is directly related to this. And so in many ways, what happens in episode 7 will make or break this entire series. And I think a lot of the confusion that people are feeling is due to unfamiliarity with this genre. You know, crime thrillers, mystery murders really require a different part of your brain to be active when watching. You have to be intently focused on the screen. And you know, I'm guilty of this as much as anyone else. Like, I doom scroll on the TikToks and the Instagrams. Sometimes I'll watch like a movie in the background when I'm playing video games, and that's fine when it's like an action movie and you don't have to really pay attention that much. But when it's a murder mystery, you really have to pay attention. And honestly, I don't even really like murder mysteries like Knives Out or The Oriental Express, specifically because I'm really not good at focusing on the little details. This is why a lot of my theories are actually not right, or they turn out to be wrong. But because I'm covering the Acolytes, I'm literally putting these movies on Adobe Premiere Timeline and scrolling through them and like watching these scenes over and over again for the little details. And that allows me to catch a lot of things that the average viewer won't. It's not because I'm smarter, it's because I have more time than you guys. You know, I'm watching these things over and over again. Now, some people will rightly say that you shouldn't have to watch something a million times to really understand or enjoy them. And I agree with that. But again, I think the weekly release just wipes our brains and our memory of what's happened in previous episodes, and it's just confusing to watch a murder mystery like this. But yeah, this is why I'm excited for episode 7 of The Acolyte tonight. I still can't believe or understand why Kogonado is directing a random Star Wars TV series. I'm excited to watch him do another episode, and I'm also excited as a fan, like, to see what happens, because I am invested in this show. I've watched it like way too many times. Well guys, enjoy the episode tonight. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.